Hello, welcome to What the Feminine, where we will show the world how to have crucial, nuanced conversations and how healthy feminine and masculine embodiment are the gateway to global healing. I'm Nicole George, the CEO and founder of Sovereign Magazine. And as the host and moderator of this show, I'd love to remind you and our guests that the questions posed in today's episodes are neither a reflection of my personal beliefs or opinions, thoughts, or ideologies, nor of Sovereign Magazines. They're simply a guide for us to go deeper into our constructed beliefs and ask ourselves, how can we remain open and curious to being recoded to a more compassionate and cohesive way of living? The content in this episode could contain references to difficult topics and subject matter. So please, please, please know that you might be triggered and honor yourself and inner knowing. Our show is never a substitute for any professional guidance. So please always seek the guidance of a certified professional. We have two beautiful women, one from the one from the US and one from Sweden today. And they are absolutely amazing. So we will go with you first, Cass. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So currently I live in the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia in the US. It's beautiful here. We're in the mountains. And by day I am a corporate girly, but throughout all of my work with clients, and working in the corporate world, I really focus on leadership energetics. And what does that look like from an executive level to management level to IC, individual contributor level? And just really getting down to energetics because that's what rules all of us day in, day out, every single breath. So I really help people sort of find their own liberation through their own unique energetics.
Yeah, and you have your own blueprint as well that we have a show about. So if you'd like to learn more about the internal method, you can go on our YouTube channel. Akashka.
Hello. Oh, nice to meet you, Cassandra. It was wonderful to hear. And I really agree with energetics being everything, like the breath of everything. So we're going to have a lot of synchronicity today. So I'm Akashka. I'm a galactic seer and health psychologist. And I've worked internationally with the beautiful privilege of being there for families that are very conscious and also women that are on an initiation path usually or have gone through a series of difficult situations that, let's say, precede a psychological perspective. So I had to just go there with my sight and speak to them about soul injustice. So at the moment, I'm educating in wherever I'm called in Gaia, which is very nomadic, on soul activism. So how to be there for soul connection as a birthright, and how to do that in connection with the land, and how to do that in connection with the sacred without it being too inaccessible. So we go deep, and today I'm just really looking forward to being here. And right now I happen to be in Sweden, so that's where I'm at. And
Yes,
I'm
and both
excited
of
to
these
be here.
beautiful ladies are our columnists as well, so you can find them in the magazine. Okay, today we are talking about shame and worthiness, healing the silent wounds across gender. And I always love to start by defining what shame and worthiness means to our
Mm.
guests because we might have different definitions and it might sit in our body differently. So, who wants to go first in defining our two words for today?
Shall I do it? Do you want to go for
Sure,
it?
absolutely. So, I always look up the definitions of whatever we're talking about for this show. I really focused on shame though, because I think worthiness, I'm a numerologist as well, so I think worthiness can sort of span a lot of our energetic bodies. But shame really lives in the seventh. And so the definition on paper is a painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by the consciousness of wrong or foolish behavior. And where shame lives in the body, which is really interesting from my perspective, is that it's sort of in our aura and it happens to be played out over and over and over again in our belief system, our past narratives, our past experiences. They almost sort of build up this foundation of which shame lives within or upon. And so I just thought it was really interesting that we were having this conversation about past beliefs, past narratives, especially with the current magazine that's out, and resiliency and all of that as well. So that's probably the intro that I would give. More to come, I'm sure.
Okay. Akashka, what about you?
It's beautiful. When I was purely working as a psychologist, I remember how I had to stay in a framework when talking about shame. That hurt. It felt like I was always touching the surface. And so I'm grateful to be able to maybe today just go a little deeper in that and just offer a cosmic perspective, and especially one that children have taught me, especially these very sensitive, perceptive, neurodivergent children whose soul is just. And for from this perspective, there has been this micro grooming and macro grooming since early infancy with very special beings that taught me that there was a specific kind of cruelty designed to block their access to their frequencies, which were, let's say, translated as their gifts. And it's in their birthright to connect to them. The shame was acting as a cancer because it didn't allow for anything to be built or analyzed or constructed. It just removed the capacity for a seed of potential to grow. And it was targeting, I mean, most of the time they would just run in the room when I was a school counselor. And I remember the children just, it was almost like they were detoxing from the pain of shame. And when I looked at it, for example, when these couples would come and they were struggling, um, in terms of worthiness, it was always coinciding. My research took me to a place that was a little bit complicated to express, that the exact point of shame was overlapping, sort of my sight could see it coating the specific gift they're meant to express. And I'd love to get into gender as we move on, because that was so significant, the kind of the pain between the man and the woman I would see. So yeah, for me, it didn't allow you to develop your own language of self-love. So you were always at the mercy of how much shame is colonizing your sacred space. And that's what I'd see with children. And they were very, very vulnerable to narcissistic relationships, toxic relationships, the more shame they had coating themselves, because then they were always searching for belonging rather than self-loyalty, because self-loyalty meant belonging to the parts of the self that were coated with shame. So they were always running away from themselves. So it's just been this means a lot to me. I'm really glad we're discussing it.
I am too, because we moved from the June full moon issue regarding being determined and resilient right into a sense of belonging. And we have an issue later on in the year, I believe it's December full moon's issue called belonging. And many contributors asked, why do you have a sense of belonging and belonging? And there was a point to it. A sense of belonging for me means where you belong in the world, in a room, in spaces, and community with others. Belonging means to yourself. And I felt a very distinct difference between those two, and being able to elevate both of those topics, if you will, because shame crosses all of that. It crosses when you're in rooms with people, and it also crosses into your internal space. So I would love to ask what you think is the root cause of not only our individual shame, but our collective shame.
Go for it, Cassandra, because this is loaded for me.
I mean, there's tons, right?
Through
So
this.
I think we just build on this. So
Yeah.
one, I think something, Akashka, that you had mentioned was sort of shame is sort of like this construction, almost like this blockade. I'm summarizing, so please correct me if I'm summarizing it correctly, paraphrasing incorrectly, but shame is almost like this construction that stops the seed of whatever that initiation is, right? And so
Mm.
um the seven type of energy that comes through is also called the archetype, right? And
Mm.
so from these past beliefs and the things that we've been taught. You talked about the cruelty, that sort of like, it's almost like this model that is constructed. Again, we're talking about architecture. And I think, we joke sometimes like, it's the fault of the patriarchy. But I do think that things such as that sort of build on this cruelty to keep a certain subset of others small or quiet or unseen, if you will. And I think that this has been taught for what feels like eons now, that there was an advantage to be taken. And so we create this idea of we have to feel shameful when we make mistakes or we're foolish. And so this interesting sort of dynamic too for energetics, there's this idea, I always talk about numbers, but there's the architect, but there's also this idea of sort of your power center, solar plexus, right? And so they're kind of opposite each other, these energetics, but this is where we potentially give our power away. So when I heard worthiness, which is really interesting, it's this 3 sort of energetics. This is also where joy lives. But if we're in this contrasting place where we're trying to build something based on a belief that we have to get to some sort of decision or some place or not make this certain mistake because past, experiences have told us that, we're giving our power away. We're causing ourselves to become unworthy, or in our minds unworthy, and sort of labeling that. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I really love the construction piece, and then how these two energetics are sort of like sitting across the table from each other, but you can't really have one without the other.
No, you can't. You really can't, because they definitely go hand in hand for sure. What do you think, Akashka?
So many goosebumps whilst you were chatting. It's like down my spine. Especially when you mention, at least my interpretation on this. By the way, I used to do tantric numerology for like 10 years, and I haven't even thought about it in these terms. So now tonight I'm going to be thinking in these terms thanks to you. Oh my goodness. Mwah, for that. Thank you. Yeah, there was when you were speaking, I was remembering the architect space and how there's a creative force. So if you have shame on a collective level programmed, what I've seen, for example, from my site is an attack directly on a being's right to create from free will. Because all that, your creative force requires a relationship that's conscious and that is accepting to what you actually are. There's a requirement of coherence, and shame fractures that relationship to the point of the crown, to the point where you can't receive yourself and you can't learn a gaze of love. And for us, when I speak of a gaze of love, when people say, oh, you see, so you just see a result, and I'm saying, no. When I see, I also create. That's why our gaze is placed on what is, let's say, shameful and targeted for so long, so that where our gaze is not in self-ownership of what we can create. So from a collective space, I think the amount of subjugation programs that are reinforced through shame, it's completely dependent. And it's for us, let's say my belief from my heritage, it means that a being is disconnected immediately from their soul. So if there's shame, then my relationship to soul is fractured, or like you would say from the 7. And I have to earn my way to being what I already am. And then there's a consumption of time. It's almost like time is colonized, your relationship with time. So the core, the sacred pillars to sustain you in this life without losing a connection to what's sacred, it becomes almost impossible. You live in a disassociated sort of, I need to belong, I need to escape, I need to understand, away from yourself. And it's and it sounds a bit, but for me, it's sort of a collective energetical cancer. If someone comes into a room and we cleanse them, the first thing I talk about is soul hygiene. And if the first thing I see is this coat of shame, it's the way that I see it, we're not going to deal with anything else until we've dealt with this. There's no point. Because from this, when this when you can take space, your own space, that isn't identifying with what consequence is there. Because when there's this quote, there's a subconscious fear of, if I am me, I will be punished in some way. I will meet a consequence that wounds myself, my sense of worthiness. So then we're just a bunch of defense mechanisms with legs. And so until we go there, until we go into that shame cleanse, which is very intimate, very personal, and also, as you would say, then it's a family, then it's the wider space. I don't go into anything else. So that's how important, for example, from that space it is.
Okay. I know people are going to want some answers around, well, then how do I cleanse this, collective cancer, if you will, right? So why don't we do it from a numerology perspective and from your seer perspective, and what the two of you would do to help somebody who's experiencing shame, first of all, have compassion for themselves, because this might have been given to them, right? And we've gone through cycles of unworthiness our whole lives, but we need to have some sort of self-forgiveness for what has transpired. But I'd love to hear some ways that you both handle shame and worthiness.
I've been going first. You want to go first?
Okay. All right, my darling. Okay, so first of all, I would never, even though, as you say, there's a collective program, I do make the being aware that this is not personal, that these shame programs are not personal. As soon as a depersonalization practice is very liberating. Most of these things that make you, for example, if they talk to me about an abusive being, or especially in the narcissistic realms, you see that they start to do this. Extraordinary women, capable women, intelligent women that I've spoken, and they just, and it's right there. Let's say in the cervical area, do you say in English, cervicales, yeah? There's like a plug-in that I immediately see, sort of a biotechnology where they have a choice, they can disengage. So I start with, seeing how their posture explains to me to the level in which they feel like they're just lucky to be even talking freely about themselves and all this. And from when we talk, for example, about what hope would be in this scenario of the collective, I did want to offer an example of what they could do. So when I was I'm 36 now. When I was about 21, I went to Peru and I met a psychologist that was part of a psychomagia, psychomagic, maybe in English, psychomagia. And it was beautiful because he was a clinical psychologist. I was still training, and he was the first time I could go, I don't have to pretend I don't see. For once, we can meld worlds together and we can cut to it, right? And he's like, right, and immediately, let's go to a shame space. So it was immediately my 8-year-old self that had considered herself a liar. Now, many children that have come to me with very high perception, that are speaking in different timelines and speaking from different senses of awareness, think at some point that they're lying because they're so engaged in their reality. So we went to it, and it's like, what was the point? And this is what I do with the beings that come at times, unless I see it and then I'm like, should we just shortcut? So I had to go through it, and I saw myself lying. I was telling stories that weren't happening about me spending time with my grandmother. She had already passed, and I kept telling stories like I was hanging out with her. And I told my friends, oh, I've been to Disneyland, and last week I did this, and last week I did that. And I remember a friend of mine when I was 8 discovered that that wasn't true. And the level, the reaction, the labels, oh my gosh, you're a liar, you're this. And I remember it was an assumed label, because a lot of shame requires emptying words and emptying. We spend so long emptying words together and reclaiming your language, because how are we going to talk about self-love if you don't know how to talk to yourself without shame, right? So there's a corrosion of the language itself. And so we looked at that, and we looked at how that framed everything for me growing up. Like you said, Cassandra, it becomes a foundation of that pollutes any relationship with anything. And it impeded this something very, very necessary that sort of, when I realized, I was like, that's the hope. That was an opportunity for me. And this is when these shame attacks happen. They coincide in time with moments where you're about to figure out there's a gift. So I didn't know I could see at the time. I was 8. I mean, I had visions, but I wasn't fully aware. And I didn't know that my stories had multidimensional content. And then I ended up being an author who wrote stories that would rewrite people's sacred content into their own relationship. And that was a key moment. So he took me back there. We did the whole EMDR, amazing, beautiful tool. Then we went through it through my site and we went down to it. And it was like, we're going to speak to that place. We're going to acknowledge that seed. And then cosmically, we removed what I could see was there. It was just almost like this putrid soil. And it's like that gift couldn't receive the nourishment, right? And that's a lot of things that I see with mothers postpartum. There's so much shame. And I'm like, of course it is, because this is your moment of creator. So of course it's programs running, so you don't receive any loving nourishment to your being, because this is the point of maximum power for you, and that's of no interest to let's say the colonizers of the sacred in this plane. So that was an example, and we go there. So that for me was very powerful, and I went down. So I learned over time that I'm like, okay, the point of maximum shame, the one that gives you sort of the hives, and you just, oh my God, I can't sit with this. And you go there, I'm like, okay, I'm going to assume I don't understand that place of shame, that gaze of shame is colonizing something beautiful I haven't acknowledged. And that trust that there is something on the other side of that I have not had the compassion and the self-acceptance, the tribe, the community, the support to sit and explore without thinking, oh my gosh, I'm such a diva, or how can I even do that? Why can't I just accept my flaws? All this. Especially, I think what upsets me a lot is shame is placed in, when you talk about this, I've had some people say, oh, doesn't that mean you're not accepting your shadow? I'm like, oh, that for me is not the same thing. And I get upset and I try my best to not get too triggered, but I get triggered because it's rough to hear how I can't go there and assume there's something I don't understand, a multidimensional construct that I could just gaze upon and let it reveal parts about me. That's me not accepting shadow. That's a rough one. I even wanted to say that out loud with us in case you you beings had a perspective. So that's been a very liberating process. I can't say I'm all the way on the other side of yay, there's no shame and something, but I notice when it comes up, and I notice in my case, for example, that it's triggered if I'm in the company of a predator. Then I have to see where my gaze goes, where my chin goes, have to see if I'm saying sorry, if I'm asking for permission to be present, all these things, no? And then I start to invoke my grandma and I ask for strength, and and it's very much understanding the compassion that's a difficult place for me to sit and be. So yeah.
Yes. Wow. Wow. That is beautiful.
So beautiful.
Thank you so much for that story. Okay, Cass, what about you?
Yeah, so this is interesting because I just had sort of like a worthiness conversation, and it was all built on shame in the corporate space. I feel like this always happens right before we get together, right? It's just divinely orchestrated. We love this. We love this for us.
Kind of thing.
But I think the things that are easiest for me to say to start would be, especially if someone is having, whether it's a client or someone on my team or a peer, having a tough time with worthiness. And usually it's about the voice, right? It's about saying something because they're afraid they're going to just be put down and their ideas don't matter. And so why would I say it at all? Literally the conversation that I was having. And so there's a couple things that I said to this person. One, before we have this meeting where you want to voice these things, why don't you go dance a little bit, listen to some music, because our creative side, our ability to find joy actually helps shake off some of the ick of the shame that we feel, like that energetic, even if you are pouting at me as I say this, or I've had clients be like, Cass, it's not going to do anything, right? And then they go and they shake their booty for 5 minutes, and then they come back and they're like, okay, well, at least I'm laughing at myself, right? It sort of brings us back to the present in our body. And so if you can do something creative, you can draw, you could sing. Singing is fantastic for this, right? Especially if your worthiness and this experience is coming from not being able to use your voice or feeling as if you can't. So anything from a creative standpoint, drawing, painting, like I said, for me, sometimes it's just creating a social media post that I'm like really passionate about. It can be as silly as that, but that will bring you back to yourself, bring you back to your body, as long as you're not being hypercritical of the output. That's key. And then the second thing I would say comes back to what Akashka was saying about sort of the awareness. If you see one that there's a relationship where you consistently feel shame, that is something to say a simple sort of journaling if you want to. You could voice note it. A lot of people don't like to journal because it's too much or whatever. I'm being sassy, but if you want to voice note, because why? Like, I feel this way in this relationship or every single conversation I have with this person, because why? And you slowly then you listen back and maybe there's something that pops out at you and you're like, doesn't feel right. Like, because why? Ultimately, that ends up usually leading us, if you're really honest with yourself, it usually leads us back to something that has occurred in our childhood that has now led to this adult version of us replaying the same narrative, the same story, and it's not the same.
Yeah, 100%. I always share, actually, it comes out on Thursday. So for anybody watching this, that would have been July 16th, because this is going to come out later. Um, Chris Melville, our coach here at Sovereign, had me on her podcast, No Small Talk, and I talk a lot about my upbringing and shame and how my parents used wealth as a weapon and I never was good enough. And it was just a lot to untangle. And that was her question to me. How much growth did you have to go through? I'm like, oh my gosh, I had to like touch every aspect of my life and I still am. Everything from everybody in my family is obese. So I've had to, untangle all of that. And so shame runs really deeply into all aspects of your life. And it wasn't until I say this on the podcast, it wasn't until both of my biological parents died. My biological mother, who I did not really know, died 12 days before my dad did. Soul contract, interesting, right? But my dad's wife is still alive, and I have subsequently estranged myself from her because after boundary being crossed, it's healthier for me. So at 43, I finally could hear myself speak, like listen to myself. I'm like, oh, I have a voice, I have a say. Oh my gosh. And I started to get to know myself 3 years ago. And that is because all I heard was their voices and all the shame that they had for me. And so it's never too late. So as you go through today, take everything that each one of us has said and really look at where shame is showing up in your life. Where is it penetrating your heart? What do you need to turn over? How high is your chin? How far are you bowing? All the things that we've talked about today. And then if you want to connect with either of these beautiful ladies, all of their details are in the show notes. You can work with each of them. If one of them resonated with you, they're also in our community.sovereign-magazine.com, and their columns are also in our magazine. So thank you so much for being here today, lovelies. I appreciate you both, and I'm sending you love.
Thank you.